Congressmen of Free Peru presented a constitutional accusation against the President of Congress, Carmen, and 9 parliamentarians in Peru. German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier was re-elected for a second term this Sunday. In Tunisia, mobilizations began following the news that the president issued a decree establishing a new provisional Supreme Council. Hi, this is from the South. I'm your news anchor, Dio Martin, from the Telesur studios in Havana. We begin with the news. In Peru, Congressmen of Free Peru presented a constitutional accusation against the President of Congress, Carmen, and 9 parliamentarians for allegedly committing various irregularities. The complaint was submitted by Congresswoman Margot Palacios of the Free Peru Party, and it is based on a meeting held on February 9th at the Casa Andina Premium Hotel in Miraflores, which was revealed by the weekly Hildebrand en sus 13. The purpose of the meeting was to discuss and agree on the constitutional changes to prevent the of Pedro Castillo as the winner of the electoral process of the second round in 2021 presidential elections in the country. The Congresswoman of Free Peru also pointed out that the accused would have presumably committed the alleged crimes of homicide, qualified by the victim's condition, criminal organization, and conspiracy for rebellion, sedition, or uprising. The government of Chile announced this Saturday that it will declare a state of constitutional exception in 4 provinces in the north of the country in view of the migratory and security crisis affecting the area. The decision was taken after a meeting between the executive and the truck owners' unions, which, in spite of the agreement, are blocking the accesses to the cities of Iquique and Antofagasta. The truck drivers have led a series of demonstrations in the last few days after a murder of a driver. The unions linked the event to the wave of migrants that have entered using unauthorized border crossings with Bolivia during the pandemic, which matches an increase in crime and delinquency in the north of Chile.
The state of exception, which was a very important point for the unions, we have determined that a state of exception will be decreed in the provinces and the border sectors. This is very important to make it clear. The province of Arica, the province of Paranícota, the province of Tamarugal, and the province of El Loa in the mountain sectors. And this will allow us to have a state of exception where the armed forces will be able to collaborate with the work of the police, strengthening the implementation of Decree 265.
In Honduras, the public ministry announced the opening of an ex officio investigation after health authorities announced the discovery of millions of expired medicines in the warehouses of the Ministry of Health. The new Minister of Health, Jose Manuel Mateo, revealed last Friday that he found expired medicines worth $215 billion in the warehouses, which translates roughly into around $8,700,000. It will be the Special Prosecutor's Office for Transparency and the Fight Against Corruption that will begin this Monday, February 14th, an ex officio investigation into the case, which has caused anger among the Honduran population. The inquiry must detail exactly these medicines, their expiration date, and above all, deduce the responsibility of the people who did not distribute these medicines to the citizens and expired in a warehouse of the Ministry of Public Health. In Nicaragua, the public ministry reports the death of Jorge Hugo Torres Jimenez after being accused of crimes considered of treason. The former Sandinista dissident guerrilla Hugo Torres, who was arrested in June 2021 in Nicaragua and charged with alleged treason, died on Saturday of an illness, the public prosecutor's office said, without detailing which one. Torres presented deterioration in his state of health, was transferred to a hospital in the capital to be treated properly, where he was always accompanied by his children, Hugo Marcel and Maria Alejandra. However, he died because of the ailments he had, said the judicial body. In the last 3 months of 2021, Spain recorded just 35% of the average rainfall it had seen during the same period from 1981 to 2010. While the arid zones of the Iberian Peninsula have historically experienced periods of drought, experts say climate change has exacerbated the problem. This year, amid record levels of low or no rainfall at all, farmers in Spain who are growing produce for all of Europe are worried that their crops for this season will be ruined. According to the National Agency, only 2005 has there been a January with almost no rain in this century. If clouds don't unleash rain in the next 2 weeks, emergency subsidies for farmers will be needed. Only 10% of the country has officially been declared under a prolonged drought. Large areas, particularly in the south, face extreme shortages that could impact the irrigation of crops.
We have gone through a first phase of meteorological drought in which we continue, and in some areas of Spain, particularly in some basins of the south of the peninsula, we are already stepping into a next phase, that of hydrological drought, and the water reserves are beginning to be at much lower levels than normal. The next consequence of this process continues in the coming weeks will be to start suffering a drought at the agricultural level, because there will be no possibility of irrigating all the hectares of cultivated fields that we have in Spain with different crops such as cereal.
On Saturday night, the humanitarian organization SOS Mediterranean rescued 88 migrants near Malta. The ship Ocean Viking welcomes on board 181 migrants saved in the central Mediterranean after a new operation last night in which it rescued 88, of which a third were minors. The minors were 27, and among them there was a newborn, says the NGO. The migrants were on a wooden raft in the search and rescue zone in the Libyan jurisdiction. This Saturday, another 94 migrants were rescued near the coast of Lampedusa, Italy's southernmost island, by its Coast Guard agents. We're going to take a short break now. Please join us again after this. Welcome back to you from the South. German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier was re-elected for a second term of 5 years by a special parliamentary assembly on Sunday. The president was elected with a big majority by a special assembly made up of the members of parliament's lower house and representatives of Germany's 16 states. The re-elected president vowed that he would continue to work on strengthening democracy in Germany and help take away fears of the future, giving the country's citizens the confidence to handle the challenges ahead. Steinmeier also vowed to help heal wounds created by the coronavirus pandemic. Germany's president has little executive power, but is considered an important moral authority in the country.
Pursuant to Article 54 of the German Constitution, whoever received the votes of the majority of the Federal Assembly, for example, whoever received at least 737 votes, shall be elected. I declare that Dr. Steinmeier has received the required majority of votes and is therefore elected Federal President of the Federal Republic of Germany.
My responsibility is for all the people who live in our country, non-partisan, yes, but I am not neutral when it comes to the cause of democracy. Whoever fights for democracy will have me on his side. Whoever attacks it will have me as an opponent.
United States Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin ordered 160 troops in Ukraine to be repositioned in Europe. Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby reported that Defense Secretary Austin gave the order to withdraw 160 Florida National Guardsmen out of Ukraine and into Europe temporarily. The decision came after Austin had a call with Russian Minister of Defense Sergei Shoigu. The Department of Defense said the two discussed Russia's buildup of troops and equipment along Ukraine's border. The announcement from Kirby came as the U.S. continued to encourage U.S. citizens, both government employees and others, to leave Ukraine amid threats of an alleged Russian aggression. White House Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said the U.S. would not send in troops to the country for rescue missions should the U.S. citizens choose to stay in the former Soviet state. Amidst the narrative of an alleged Russian invasion, Ukraine said there is no point closing its airspace after the United States warned that Russian troops could invade the Eastern European nation at any time. According to a senior Ukrainian official, if particular air carriers and private air carriers decide to reconfigure their flight schedule, this certainly has nothing to do with the decisions or policies of the Ukrainian government. He was referring to calls made by some air transport companies such as the Dutch carrier KLM, who became the first major airline to indefinitely suspend flights to the former Soviet Republic because of the rising risks. Farmers in central Greece on Sunday blocked a highway with tractors and poured cans of milk on the ground to protest against rising energy costs. Hundreds of tractors were parked on the major transport route outside the city of Larissa as part of the protests. The farmers were demanding the abolition of the electricity price adjustment clause, which the government said reflect changes in the price of oil and natural gas imports. Protesters were also calling for lower fuel taxes. Greek farmers say they are determined to shut down all the country's major highways if the government doesn't meet their demands.
For farmers to have a future, we must have a present. At present, it is questionable whether us and our flocks will survive. The issues with the electricity price adjustment clause, the price of oil and the national reserves make us worry about the farmers' future. We must prevail now or never in order to stay and produce on our farms and with our flocks. Our problems have made us take to the streets. They are more acute than ever. We are talking about production costs which working farmers cannot bear. We are talking about diesel that costs about 160 euros per liter, while in other European countries it is only 70 cents.
Voters in Switzerland on Sunday rejected a campaign that aimed to make it the first country to ban experiments on animals. People also voted to approve tougher restrictions on cigarette advertising. According to government figures, 21% of voters were in favor of a ban of an animal testing and 79% were against the measure. Polling stations for in-person voting opened for 2 hours, but most voters had already cast their ballots by post. The results of the referendum could have a significant impact on two of the country's major industries, the pharmaceutical sector and the tobacco giants that are headquartered in Switzerland. Iran's book world is shrinking as U.S. sanctions Biden cash-strapped publishers struggle over the price of paper. For literature lovers in Iran, a new novel has long provided a brief respite from a grinding economic crisis triggered by international pressure over Tehran's contested nuclear program. But now losing yourself in a good book is becoming harder. If a 200-page novel sold for about $160 last year, its price today is about $410, most of which is the cost of production. Iran does not produce its own paper pulp for publishing, so relies on imports, and while those are not under sanctions, they must be paid for in foreign currency. So publishers are not only slashing the number of titles published, but also cutting the number of pages of those they do print by shrinking the font size. As soon as the U.S. sanctions were reinstated in 2018, the price of paper rose.
Reading books is a miracle today because the majority of customers belong to the middle class, and given the economic conditions, their priority is to obtain essential goods such as food.
Publishing has suffered a major crisis, which could become existential. As soon as the U.S. sanctions were reinstated in 2018, the price of paper rose.
And Afghanistan's central bank officials expressed their rejection of plans by the U.S. to seize their frozen assets in the country. The bank recalled that the nation's investments abroad are made in accordance with international practices and belong to the people of Afghanistan. In addition to not accepting such measures, the bank is calling for the decision to be reversed and for the return of Afghanistan's foreign currency, while calling the move an injustice to Afghans. The announcement comes after the United States Treasury Department announced on Friday that it plans to block at least $7 billion Afghan dollars frozen in U.S. banks as part of aid and pensions to September 11 victims. Afghanistan's former president on Sunday called a White House order to unfreeze $3.5 billion in Afghan assets held in the U.S. for families of 9/11 victims an atrocity against the Afghan people. The former Afghan president sought the help of U.S. citizens, particularly the families of the thousands killed in 9/11 terrorist attacks, to press President Joe Biden to rescind last week's order.
I call on the American people to see into the depth of the suffering of the Afghan people. And just like we commiserate with them for the tragedy of September 11, that they commiserate with us. And I ask the U.S. courts to do the opposite, to return the Afghan money back to the Afghan people. This money does not belong to any government.
We're going to take a final short break now. Please join us again after this. Welcome back to From the South. In Tunisia, mobilizations began following the news. The president issued a decree establishing a new provisional Supreme Council. The African country has seen a series of demonstrations in recent weeks against President Sayed, who in July 2021 dissolved the government and suspended parliament by giving himself greater powers. As hundreds of protesters took to the streets of the capital, Tunis, as part of a march organized by the government's largest political party, Ennahda, and a civil society organization in rejection of President Sayed's recent measures. These decrees seek to replace a body he abolished and give himself additional powers to control the country's main judicial organization.
Democratic movement, the political and democratic movement of the street continues with the same objectives and the same approach. If we defend the republic and democracy, this can only be through democratic mechanisms. If President Sayed has positioned himself against the will of his people, while we remind him that it is necessary to resume the democratic process, the change will only be possible through the mobilization of people.
5 United Nations employees were abducted by an unarmed man in southern Yemen while returning to Aden after a field mission. According to a spokesman for the top UN official in the Middle East country, the staff were abducted in the Abiyan governorate. The official also said the UN was in close contact with the authorities to secure the employees' release and that 4 of those abducted were Yemeni nationals. Abductions are frequent in Yemen, where armed tribesmen and al-Qaeda-linked armed fighters take hostages to swap for prisoners or cash. The country has been mired in violence since the Iran-aligned Houthi movement overthrew the government from the capital in late 2014, prompting a military coalition led by Saudi Arabia to intervene months later. The war in Yemen has killed tens of thousands of people and caused a dire humanitarian crisis, with 80% of the population reliant on aid. Crowds of protesters blocked the streets of Ottawa's city centre for a third straight week to show support for Canadian truckers protesting COVID-19 restrictions. Canadian police on Saturday worked to clear a key bridge of truckers protesting COVID-19 restrictions, even as authorities in Ottawa braced for renewed demonstrations expected to bring thousands to the federal capital. In Ontario, where authorities declared a state of emergency, the provincial Supreme Court ordered trucks to end their blockade of the strategic Ambassador Bridge, which linked the city of Windsor in Canada to Detroit, Michigan, the United States. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau promised an increasingly robust police intervention, adding that borders cannot remain closed and this conflict must eventually come to an end.
Freedom of choice. It's not about any. I am vaccinated, but my thing is that was my choice. And if someone beside me chooses to not, that's not my business. It's the freedom of choice.
My third time back up here, so I've been here first weekend. Last week we came up and we're back again. We'll keep coming back as often as we can.
In New Zealand, anti-vaccine protesters continued their protests despite a severe storm caused by Hurricane Dovie. Protests in front of New Zealand's parliament continued for the sixth consecutive day, rejecting strict health restrictions and demanding the elimination of compulsory vaccination. The hurricane's impact caused power outages, landslides, and evacuations in New Zealand on Sunday, but the anti-vaccine demonstrators were out front. Legislature. Police arrested 122 people Thursday in an attempt to end the protest. However, the protesters' determination increased after this.
We've got 4 children, we've got 2 cars on finance, we have a mortgage, we've got lots of animals, and when we both lost our jobs to the mandate, it was, we're going to lose our house.
There has been over 15,000 people coming through this for the since Monday.
Protesters who were demonstrating against COVID-19 rules marched through The Hague for a second day on Sunday to show solidarity with Canada's truck demonstration. The group known as Netherlands Resist organized a protest meeting at Malieveld before marching to the Dutch Parliament. Police officers were present at the demonstration after truckers blocked roads on Saturday. Protesters in Ontario blocked the United States-Canadian border bridge with trucks in opposition to COVID-19 vaccine mandates and other restrictions. According to the Malaysian Health Ministry, the country recorded more than 22,000 new COVID-19 infections, bringing the national total to more than 3 million since the beginning of the pandemic. The daily increase of COVID-19 infections in the country has remained above 10,000 every day over the past week. The top health official in the Asian nation said the country has seen a wave of Omicron infections and called on elderly people to get their booster shots as soon as possible. The pandemic's basic reproduction number exceeded 1.50 in Malaysia, but the rates of severe condition, hospitalization, and fatality remain comparatively low, and the pandemic remains controllable in the country. As of Friday, the death toll from COVID-19 had reached more than 32,000 fatalities. Sara Escobar is the only athlete representing Ecuador in this year's Winter Olympics in Beijing. That was also the nation's flag bearer during the opening ceremony for Beijing 2022 on February 4th. Sara was born to Ecuadorian parents in the U.S., where she learned to ski at 3 and started training as a racer at 8. She made the choice of representing Ecuador when entering FIS-level competitions 4 years ago, the same time when the first Ecuadorian Winter Olympian, Klaus Jungbluth Rodriguez, debuted in cross-country skiing in Pyeongchang. Escobar, who was already returned to her home country after competing at the Olympics, lauded China's coordination of the Games and warm reception towards competing athletes. The 2022 Winter Games, which will end February 20th, include 7 sports, 15 disciplines, and a record 109 events.
This is my first time participating in the Winter Olympic Games. It was a really beautiful experience, and I'm so happy I had the honor of representing my country. Once I landed, I realized how China really had the priority of the athletes and the coaches at their most top priority. And when we arrived, the airport was empty. It was only for the athletes. They even had us sit only in one seat on the buses just to keep us safe. And I thought that was incredible how they really cared for our safety, made sure it was their top priority.
We've come to the end of this news brief, but remember you can find these and many other stories on the website at Tell Us Our English. You can also join us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For Tell Us Our English, I'm Leo Martin. Thanks for watching.